I carried a $2,480 wheelchair into my parents' dining room, thinking it was love stitched in steel and memory foam. My father stared at it like it was poison. "Return it," he said slowly, so no one could miss a word. "I'd rather crawl than owe you." My mother smirked into her napkin. My sister filmed my face like it was comedy. My brother didn't even look up. Not one person spoke my name. So I stacked plates, folded the chair back into my trunk, and left. By sunrise, their cameras would capture what they never meant me to see. Dinner at my parents' house had always carried the weight of expectation, but that night it felt like walking into a courtroom where the verdict had already been written. The dining room smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, the same meal we had eaten every Sunday since I was a child. The table was perfectly set, linen napkins folded in sharp triangles, glasses filled before anyone sat, silverware aligned like soldiers awaiting command. I rolled the wheelchair in behind me, its black frame gleaming under the overhead light, the hum of its small motor announcing my presence before my voice did. I had spent weeks researching the model, calling insurance, balancing invoices, comparing features like posture support and cushion density. It wasn't charity, it was medical necessity. My father's surgery had left him fragile. He wouldn't admit it, but the stairs in that house were mountains now, and the hallway to the bathroom stretched like a mile. I thought the chair would give him dignity, control, mobility. Instead, it became the stage prop for my humiliation. "Return it," my father said, each syllable deliberate, a gavel striking the air. "I'd rather crawl than owe you." His voice was calm, measured, but it sliced sharper than shouting. My mother Ruth pressed her napkin against her mouth, eyes crinkling, a laugh smothered as though this were entertainment. Hannah, my sister, raised her phone just high enough that I saw the red recording light flash, her lips twisting into a grin. "For the scrapbook," she murmured, but loud enough for me to hear. My younger brother Tyler didn't even bother to look up from his plate. His fork clinked against porcelain as though nothing had been said at all. In that moment, the world tilted. It wasn't just my father's insult, it was the silence that followed. No one corrected him. No one defended me. The people who shared my blood sat in a neat row, watching me absorb the blow, and treated it as spectacle. The chair stood between us, a gift transformed into evidence that I did not belong. I felt heat flood my cheeks, but no tears came. Crying would have been a gift to them, proof that their cruelty landed. Instead, I steadied my hands, lifted the serving tray, and began collecting plates as though I were hired help. I stacked forks, knives, glasses, careful not to let them rattle, careful not to let my breathing betray me. My family continued to eat, their conversation resuming like a radio unpaused. Hannah laughed about work. Tyler asked for salt. My father reached for wine. My name was not spoken. When the plates were cleared, I wheeled the chair back to the door. Its rubber tires squeaked softly against the hardwood, a sound that seemed to echo louder than any word. No one stopped me. No one asked why. I folded it, lifted it into my trunk, and closed the lid. The slam of metal was the only goodbye. I didn't drive home. Instead, I headed 2 towns over and checked into a motel with flickering neon and paper-thin walls, the kind of place no one in my family would ever set foot in. I lay on the bed fully dressed, the television glowing without sound, staring at the ceiling like it might answer a question I had been too afraid to ask. What if love had never been here at all? As the hours dragged, memories shuffled like cards in my head. The times I had picked up prescriptions when my father didn't have time. The weeks I had handled insurance calls during his recovery because paperwork confused him. The afternoons I stocked their fridge when Ruth said she was too tired to shop. I had been the quiet scaffolding of this family, propping them up while believing that usefulness was the same as belonging. I pulled my laptop from my bag and opened our old shared accounts, the ones they never bothered to close. Transaction histories spilled across the screen, my deposits covering holidays, medical bills, even home repairs. The percentages were undeniable. 90% of the savings came from me, yet my name was the one missing from their trust. Proof had always been there. I just hadn't looked with open eyes. I didn't rage. I didn't draft angry emails or plan confrontations. I clicked through each account with methodical calm, downloading statements, securing copies, building a digital spine out of years they had tried to erase me from. This was not revenge. This was insurance, the kind I could control. Before I shut the laptop, I sent one short message to Ethan, my husband. I need some space. I'll stay away for a while. Don't ask me to explain yet. He didn't need to know that the explanation had already been carved into me at that dinner table, delivered not in words, but in silence. I closed the computer, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness settle. For the first time in years, I was not their fixer, not their manager, not their convenient daughter. I was just a woman in a motel room, staring at the cracked ceiling, realizing that sometimes family is the sharpest blade you never see coming. The table had one empty chair that night, set at the far end as though waiting for a guest who never arrived. It wasn't unusual. Sometimes my aunt would show up late, sometimes a neighbour dropped by, but that night it stayed vacant. My eyes drifted to it more than once, the blank space reminding me of the wheelchair I had wheeled in. Both sat unused, unwanted, symbols of absence rather than belonging. The irony did not escape me. One chair missing at the table, one chair refused at the door. Every sound in the room seemed exaggerated, sharpened by my silence. The scrape of my father's knife across his plate was steady, unhurried, as though nothing monumental had just been said. My mother's fork clinked delicately against porcelain as she picked through potatoes, a rhythm that sounded like quiet approval. Hannah's nails tapped her phone screen under the table. She didn't look up, but I could feel her smirk in the air. Tyler sighed loudly, an exaggerated show of boredom, like he had better places to be. None of them looked at me, not really. Their glances slid past me, like I was another piece of furniture, something occupying space without deserving attention. The wheelchair waited near the wall, black frame gleaming under chandelier light, its padded seat looking softer than the hard wooden chairs we sat on. Yet it might as well have been invisible. I thought about unfolding it, setting it at the table, strapping myself in as a gesture of rebellion. Instead, I collected plates, ignoring the throb in my throat. No one thanked me. The empty chair at the end of the table remained untouched, its vacancy echoing louder than any insult. Later, at the motel, the emptiness followed me. The sheets smelled of bleach, the air conditioner rattled, and the neon sign outside flickered like a broken heartbeat. I lay still, listening to the muffled footsteps in the hallway, the sound of strangers coming and going. For the first time, I realized how much noise my family had made just by existing around me, yet how little of that noise had ever been for me. I reached for my phone, intending to scroll mindlessly, but my notifications told another story. Buried in the Gmail account we had once used as a family hub, I found a reminder. Upcoming appointment, fertility lab, Tuesday 9 a.m. My chest tightened. I had created that calendar entry months ago, careful to keep it private, careful to dream in silence. But the shared account had synced automatically, and no one had bothered to disconnect. My mother had access, my father too. Even Hannah, who still used the Gmail to manage photo albums. How many eyes had seen it? How many of them already knew something I had never said aloud? I shut the app quickly, but the damage was done. A chill spread through me that had nothing to do with the motel air conditioning. If they had seen it, then the dinner wasn't just cruelty, it was a message. A way of reminding me that control, even over my own body, was never mine to keep. I turned to my laptop, more for comfort than purpose. The glow lit up the dim room as I logged into the Ring app still tied to my parents' account. I had installed the cameras months ago when my father was recovering, setting up alerts for nurse visits, deliveries, groceries. They had never removed my guest access. Now the app opened without resistance, offering me views of their porch, their living room, the very dining table where I had been erased hours earlier. The cameras hummed like unblinking witnesses, recording everything, even silence. I watched the living room feed. The wheelchair was gone. My trunk had taken it away. But the empty dining chair still stood at the end of the table, perfectly aligned, perfectly unused. For a long while I stared at it, the image blurring until the wood looked like a hollow silhouette. One empty chair in their house, another folded in my car, both waiting for someone to claim them. I closed the feed, backed up the files, and forced myself to breathe. Tonight had been the collapse, the breaking point where belonging turned into exile. But inside the wreckage, I found something steadier, the quiet clarity of knowing exactly where I stood. No shouting, no demands, no begging for space at their table. Just the resolve to stop pretending an empty chair was ever meant for me. I lay back on the bed, eyes heavy, and whispered into the darkness, not for them, not for Ethan, but for myself. From here, I move differently. The motel walls didn't answer, but the silence felt less like punishment and more like a blank page. The morning after the dinner felt like waking from anesthesia, groggy, heavy, but with a faint sting of clarity cutting through the fog. I brewed the motel's bitter coffee, sat at the small desk beneath a buzzing lamp, and opened my laptop. The night before had burned a truth into me. Belonging in my parents' house was a performance I could no longer audition for. So I shifted to what I knew best: logistics. If emotion had failed me, maybe numbers would not. The first step was redirecting my paycheck. For years I had let it flow into the joint account I had once used with my family's business, a relic from when I handled their billing. My name sat there, but my control never did. I logged into the HR portal of the hospital where I worked and entered new routing numbers, my own account, unlinked, untouchable. One confirmation email later, my income was no longer theirs to monitor. Next came the savings account, one that had always been labelled Family Emergency Fund. I had poured more into it than anyone, naively convinced that contribution equaled acceptance. Downloading the statements, I tallied the percentages. 91% mine. The numbers didn't lie, even if my family always had. I saved the files into a folder marked Heritage, encrypted and backed up to an external drive. Then I turned to the inheritance from my grandfather. Years ago, before dementia clouded his voice, he had whispered to me that the land deed tucked into his safe was meant for me. My father had insisted on consolidating it for the family trust. That morning, I requested digital copies from the county clerk, cross-referenced the deed number, and confirmed. My name was still etched into the record. My father might have tried to bury it under collective ownership, but the paper trail had not rotted away. With evidence secure, I dialed the number of a lawyer I had researched weeks earlier but never called. Her assistant answered, brisk and efficient. I booked a consultation for the following week, describing it vaguely as clarification of family property rights. The phrase tasted strange, like admitting out loud that blood was not enough to secure fairness. By noon, I felt steadier. Numbers gave me spine where words had failed. But clarity is fragile. A single notification pulled me back into the theatre I thought I'd left behind. The Ring app chimed softly, a push alert from the very house I had abandoned. Out of reflex, I opened it. The camera feed bloomed to life, my parents' dining room bright with morning light. The empty chair still stood at the end of the table, But now my family filled the other seats, eating breakfast like actors reprising their roles. Their voices carried through the microphone, sharp even through digital static. "She always makes a spectacle," my mother said, her tone airy, as if cruelty were small talk, dragging that thing in like she was saving the day. Hannah's voice followed, smooth and rehearsed. "You know she'll spin it for attention. She probably already posted about it." She reached for her coffee, nails clicking against the mug, her words practiced like a press release rewriting history. Then Tyler laughed, a low, careless chuckle. "Maybe she'll ride the chair herself. At least it'd finally shut her up." The table erupted in short bursts of laughter, a chorus of dismissal. I sat in the motel room, the glow of their kitchen on my screen, listening as they carved me down without knowing I was still in the room, invisible but present. Every sentence was a scalpel. My fingers hovered over the microphone toggle. I could have spoken. I could have reminded them that I was there, that I heard everything, that their stage was not as private as they thought. Instead, I clicked record. The app saved the feed, packaging their words into a digital file I stored beside the bank statements and inheritance deeds. No confrontation, no pleas, just evidence. I closed the laptop slowly, my reflection faint in the dark screen. This wasn't about revenge. It was about preservation, of truth, of self, of the parts of me they tried to edit out of the family script. The dining table on the screen faded, replaced by my own tired face, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was the one being erased. The afternoon became a slow unravelling of ties I hadn't realised were still knotted. For years, I had been the one signing forms, filling out insurance claims, updating passwords on portals my parents never understood. "You're good at that," they would say, sliding paperwork across the table as though I were an employee, not a daughter. That morning in the motel, I decided to reclaim what I had given away too freely. I started with the insurance portals. My name had been listed as secondary contact for half a dozen policies, health, dental, even home coverage for properties that technically weren't mine. Each had required my email, my login, my diligence. Now, one by one, I revoked permissions. I removed my phone number from emergency contacts, deleted my signature from authorization lines. A part of me worried it was petty, but another part recognized it for what it was, a severing. They had expected me to manage their lives indefinitely. By pulling back, I was handing their chaos back to them, the way it always should have been. Passwords followed. I cycled through old logins, shutting down shared accounts where my credentials still lingered. The streaming services, the pharmacy portals, the utility auto payments I had once set up to help out. Every deletion was a click of scissors against invisible threads. For the first time, my maiden name, Collins, felt less like heritage and more like a password they had been using without permission. Now it was mine again. The work steadied me. It was surgical, methodical, almost cleansing. My family had built their power not on strength, but on my compliance. By pulling away, I wasn't striking them. I was simply refusing to hold them up any longer. The rhythm of control carried me through lunch, but clarity is fragile. By mid-afternoon, the phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A man's voice introduced himself as a representative from the medical supply company. "Mrs. Collins?" he asked. "It's Miss Collins," I corrected automatically. He hesitated, then continued. "I just wanted to confirm your request to cancel the warranty on the wheelchair purchased last week. It requires your signature, and we received a document earlier today. I just need verbal confirmation before we proceed." My pulse spiked. "Cancel the warranty?" "Yes, ma'am. The paperwork had your name signed at the bottom. We process these things quickly, but policy requires a phone check too." I steadied my voice. "Read me the signature." There was a pause, then the faint sound of papers shuffling. Mara L. Collins, he read, dated yesterday. The room tilted. I hadn't signed anything. My laptop sat open in front of me, the receipt from the purchase still glowing in my downloads folder. I had paid in full. I had kept every document, and yet here was a form with my name forged, already working its way into the system. "Don't process it," I said firmly. "That's not my signature. Lock the account. Send me the scanned document immediately." The man agreed, cautious now, his tone shifting to one of concern. Within minutes, an email arrived. I opened the attachment and stared at the shaky imitation of my handwriting. The loops too wide, the letters uneven. Whoever had done it knew my name, but not my hand. I saved the file into my heritage folder, naming it forgery1.pdf. My fingers moved without hesitation. Screenshot the email, back up the log, draft a note to my lawyer. The calmness surprised me. Anger would come later, maybe grief too, but in that moment, all I felt was the cold click of another thread snapping. For a brief second, I had believed I was ahead, that by redirecting accounts and revoking permissions I had regained control. But this forged cancellation was a reminder that my family would not play by the same rules. I was building a case with receipts, while they were already scribbling lies onto paper, confident that their signatures carried more weight than mine. I leaned back in the motel chair, the vinyl squeaking beneath me, and stared at the ceiling. The arc of my emotions was jagged, falling into betrayal, climbing with methodical planning, then plunging again at the sight of my forged name. The sin curve of my family's cruelty had just begun, and I was strapped to its rise and fall whether I wanted to be or not. But unlike them, I had records. And records, I reminded myself, don't lie. The motel room was dark except for the glow of my laptop when the alert buzzed through my phone. Ring notification, motion detected, 11:47 p.m. I hesitated before opening it, already bracing myself for the familiar view of my parents' porch. What I saw instead made my stomach lurch. The wheelchair. Someone was rolling it through the back patio door, careful, almost tender. No alarm blared. The code must have been entered correctly. Only a family member would know it. The figure stayed mostly in shadow, but I could see the chair's wheels leave a faint trail of mud across the hardwood. They parked it directly in the centre of the living room, facing my father's recliner like a silent challenge, then slipped back out the way they came. For a moment, I thought it might be a dream, some cruel loop of imagination. But the timestamp was real, the pixels sharp. My father's house was now holding the very object he had spat at hours earlier, as though it had walked back on its own. Minutes later, the phone rang. My mother's number flashed across the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice trembling between outrage and fear. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said evenly. "The chair! It's in the living room! Don't you dare play games with us! We know you brought it back." "I haven't been near your house since dinner," I replied. My voice was calm, but inside my pulse thundered. There was muffled commotion in the background, Hannah's sharp tone, Tyler's voice cracking with nervous laughter. My father barked something I couldn't make out. My mother returned to the line. "You always have to make everything about you. Is this your revenge?" I ended the call without answering. Instead, I downloaded the ring footage, encrypted it, and sent it directly to my lawyer with a single note. "I did not re-enter the property. This is proof." She replied within minutes, assuring me that the clip was valuable evidence. If the family tried to accuse me formally, the footage would stand as my alibi and their own haunting. The chair had become a ghost, and I was content to let it haunt them. The next morning, I turned my attention to something I had avoided for years, the safe in my father's office. I had the code. He'd given it to me back when he was recovering from surgery, trusting me to file his receipts and invoices when the painkillers dulled his memory. He probably never thought I'd use it for myself. I drove back to my own house, retrieved the documents I'd scanned years ago, and compared them against what I found inside the safe. The same spiral notebooks lay stacked in sloppy piles, the same crumpled receipts held together by rubber bands, pages of handwritten numbers, notes in my father's cramped script, lists of cash jobs that never appeared in official tax filings, invoices adjusted with whiteout, balances rounded down, payments crossed out and rewritten. I spread the papers across my desk, the motel's flimsy wood barely holding the weight of decades of secrecy. My father's empire wasn't built on discipline or brilliance. It was built on shortcuts, omissions, and a belief that no one would ever look closely enough. I resisted the urge to mark the pages, to highlight the fraud in glaring yellow. This wasn't my job anymore. My only task was preservation. So I pulled out the portable scanner I carried for work and fed each page through one by one. The hum of the machine was steady, almost soothing, as if turning their lies into digital files gave me back control. File names piled up on the screen. Ledger 1998.pdf, receipts, 2004.pdf, cash jobs, 2010.pdf. I built folders, mirrored backups, sent copies to cloud storage under encrypted keys. When the last page slid through, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Then I composed an email to my lawyer. Attached are digitized records of my father's bookkeeping practices. Originals remain in his possession. These scans are for safekeeping only. I pressed send and watched the progress bar crawl across the screen until it disappeared. I didn't celebrate. I didn't curse. I simply sat back, staring at the neat digital architecture on my laptop, and realized something. My family had spent years treating me like their bookkeeper, their fixer, their disposable accountant. They had asked me to manage their mess, believing compliance was loyalty. But by archiving their corruption, I had finally shifted the weight. Their secrets no longer belonged solely to them. The wheelchair in their living room, the forged warranty cancellation, the ledgers in my hands. Each piece was a fracture in the foundation they thought unshakable. They wanted me erased, but instead I was becoming their record keeper in a way they could never erase. I replayed the ring footage 6 times, each loop revealing something I had missed before. The figure who rolled the chair in stayed mostly hidden, face turned away from the lens, but the movements were deliberate, practiced, someone who knew the layout, who knew the blind spots. My lawyer had told me to treat the footage as evidence, not entertainment, but part of me couldn't resist dissecting every frame. Then another thought struck me: timing. I opened Hannah's social media, a reflex I had tried to break for years. There she was, smiling into her phone camera at 11:52 p.m. The same minute the wheelchair was being parked in the living room. The caption read, "Girls' night out, don't wait up." The geotag placed her across town at a trendy bar. The comments filled in quickly. Friends teasing her about karaoke, co-workers dropping emojis. For once, her obsession with broadcasting her life worked in my favour. If Hannah was sipping cocktails and posting selfies, she couldn't have been the shadow pushing that wheelchair. One suspect eliminated. My family's favourite narrator, their chronicler of false stories, was innocent of this particular act. The discovery gave me a strange flicker of satisfaction. Not relief, Hannah had still weaponized her words against me, but clarity. The chair had not rolled itself back into the house. Someone else had chosen to make it a phantom. I filed screenshots of her posts next to the ring footage, timestamp against timestamp, the digital puzzle tightening. The next twist came later when I scanned through additional clips from the same night. One camera, tucked in the corner of the kitchen, caught a sliver of the living room. After the wheelchair appeared, Ruth entered the frame. My mother moved quickly, glancing toward the front door before crouching beside the chair. She pressed a towel to the wheels, scrubbing mud from the treads. She worked with efficiency, as though she'd done it before, pausing only to glance back over her shoulder. Then she disappeared from the frame. Minutes later, she was on the phone to me, shrill, accusing, demanding to know what I had done. And yet in her official statement to the police, one I obtained later through my lawyer, she claimed she had walked into the living room, shocked to see the chair, and immediately called for help. No mention of cleaning, no mention of scrubbing mud from evidence. I froze the clip, my mother's bent figure illuminated in pale grayscale. The towel moved across the wheels with mechanical precision. A gesture meant to erase something before anyone else noticed, but cameras don't forget. For a moment, I felt myself sinking. Another betrayal, another layer of deceit from someone I had once begged to notice me. But then the curve of my emotions shifted upward again. This wasn't just cruelty, it was a mistake. She had forgotten that I still had access. She had cleaned the wheels while under the watch of the very system I had installed. I labelled the clip coverup_Ruth, MP4, and added it to the growing archive. The arc of the night became clear. The chair's mysterious return, Hannah's proven alibi, Ruth's attempt to stage the scene. The story they would tell, Mara brought the chair back out of spite, was already unravelling. I leaned back in the motel chair, letting the sequence play through my mind. Upturn, the satisfaction of eliminating a suspect, the evidence lining up neatly. Downturn, the sting of realizing my mother was complicit in deception. Upturn again, the recognition that her own hands, her own towel, betrayed her more loudly than anything I could say. For years they had insisted I exaggerated, that I was too dramatic, too sensitive, too eager to play the victim. But the cameras told a different story, one that required no narration from me. They had forgotten that silence leaves a trail too, and now their own actions were speaking in the language of evidence. I closed the laptop, exhaustion pooling in my bones. The wheelchair had become more than a gift rejected. It was a mirror, reflecting their lies back onto them. And as long as I held the camera feeds, the mirror would never crack. The email came from an unexpected source. Zoe, Tyler's fiancée. We had spoken only a handful of times, polite exchanges at family dinners, her eyes always darting to me with a kind of cautious sympathy. She never joined in the laughter at my expense, but she never challenged it either. Now, her message arrived in my inbox like a flare in the night. I think you should see this. Attached was a scanned document, a draft of a prenuptial agreement. At first I assumed she had sent it by mistake, but then I saw the handwritten notes in the margins and the highlighted sections. One phrase stood out like it was written in fire: family assets not publicly disclosed. Beneath it, a neat annotation in a lawyer's hand: Collins Heritage Trust, beneficiaries, Hannah and Tyler Collins. My breath caught. My name was absent. I scrolled further, each line pressing harder against the wound. The trust had been established years ago by my father, Gerald, using funds and property accumulated through the family business. It was designed to protect assets for the benefit of future Collins generations. Except apparently, future didn't include me. My bloodline had been edited out of the story. The notes in the prenup made it plain Zoe was expected to sign away any claim to the trust should the marriage falter. The assets weren't hers to touch. They were earmarked for Hannah and Tyler, the chosen heirs. The rest of us were footnotes, or worse, erased entirely. I sat motionless, the motel air thick with the sound of the ancient air conditioner. Rage flared hot, then cooled into something sharper. My exclusion hadn't been accidental. It was scripted, deliberate, woven into contracts before I had even realized such a trust existed. I typed a quick thank you to Zoe, my fingers trembling. I don't know why you trusted me with this, but I won't forget it. She replied within minutes, because I think they're hiding more from both of us. The same afternoon, another message landed in my voicemail, my mother's voice wavering, rehearsed. Mara, you need to stop making a scene, she began, her words sliding between pleading and scolding. It's not good for the family. Think of your father's health. Think of the grandchildren. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. Her use of the word grandchildren made me pause. My parents had never shown much interest in my plans for a family. I hadn't told them anything concrete. IVF had been my secret project, a folder of research tucked away, a line of savings siphoned quietly from my paycheck. The only trace was a single appointment reminder I had accidentally scheduled on the shared Gmail calendar months ago. I had forgotten about it. They hadn't. I reopened the inbox, scrolled back, and there it was. Fertility clinic, initial consult, March 14th, 9 a.m. The event was marked private, but privacy meant little when the account itself was shared. My mother had seen it, maybe my father too, perhaps even Hannah, who had a habit of snooping under the guise of family organization. The voicemail now took on a different shade. Think of the grandchildren. She wasn't urging me to protect hypothetical children. She was warning me, if I pushed too hard, even my future children, the ones I hadn't yet conceived, would be written out, just like I had been. My skin prickled with a cold sweat. It was one thing to be excluded from dinners, mocked at tables, erased from ledgers. It was another to realize my family had peered into the most private corner of my life, a corner I hadn't even shared with Ethan yet. They had seen my hope, my plan, and weaponized it into leverage. The theme crystallized with brutal clarity, control. They wanted to dictate inheritance, dictate narratives, dictate even my right to build a future. Their scripts didn't just omit me, they smothered me, rewrote me into a character who existed only to serve their story. I saved the voicemail, exported the file, and added it to my growing archive. Ruth_grandchildren, threat.mp3. Another piece of evidence. Another receipt. I stared at the motel ceiling, the same cracked plaster I had studied for nights now, and whispered to myself, they can script me out of their trust, but they will not script me out of my own life. The folder of evidence grew heavier on my laptop, each file another line in a counter-narrative I was finally daring to write. I didn't respond to Zoe with lectures or advice. I didn't warn her to run or to fight. Instead, I slid a small USB drive into an envelope, scrawled 4 words on the label, "Ask before you sign," and dropped it at the post office under dim fluorescent light. Inside were 2 files, the scanned ledgers I had digitized from my father's safe, and the prenup draft Zoe had already seen, annotated with its damning note about the Collins Heritage Trust. It wasn't my job to tell her what to do. She wasn't my soldier, and I wasn't hers. She deserved to decide whether to bind herself to the family or to walk away with her eyes open. The USB was not a directive, it was a mirror. Whatever she chose to see in it would be her truth to carry. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of relief. It was the kind of quiet power that comes not from shouting, but from handing someone else the missing piece of their puzzle. If my family wanted to script everyone's roles, I had just given Zoe the chance to rewrite hers. That night, still restless, I scrolled through old voice memos on an ancient backup drive. The device was a relic from my college years, one I had nearly forgotten existed. Most of the files were class lectures or half-hearted diary entries, but one clip stopped me cold. It was dated 15 years ago, recorded in the small off-campus apartment where I used to crash between shifts at the student clinic. I pressed play, and my own younger voice filled the room, shaky but determined. "I don't think this is right," I had whispered into the recorder. Dad said he needed my social security number just to co-sign something small, just to help the business. But today I got a letter about a credit line, thousands of dollars in my name. I don't remember signing anything. I think he forged it. I don't know who to tell. Maybe I'll just keep this in case. The audio crackled, but the meaning was unmistakable. My father had used my SSN to open a line of credit, a safety net for the company, without my consent. He had folded my identity into his empire the same way he folded my labour, without acknowledgement, without permission. I sat frozen in the motel chair, listening again and again to the younger me, to the fear in her voice, to the silence that followed. I had buried that memory under years of compliance, chalked it up to filial duty, to helping out. But hearing it now, paired with the prenup and the trust, the pattern snapped into place. This wasn't just exclusion, it was exploitation. They had cut me out of the inheritance while using my name to build it. I exported the file, renamed it forgery_snaudio.mp3, and added it to my archive. My lawyer would know what to do with it. The emotional curve plunged. It wasn't just about being written out of the trust anymore. It was about realizing I had been a ghost donor all along, the invisible collateral behind their so-called legacy. My father's empire wasn't simply not mine. Parts of it had been stolen from me. I stared at the evidence folders piling up on my laptop, ring clips, scanned ledgers, forged warranties, now a recording from my own youth. Each piece felt heavier, but also undeniable. My family wanted to bury me in silence. Instead, they had left a trail of receipts too loud to ignore. For a moment, despair swelled, another downturn in the curve, a deeper drop than before. But then I thought of Zoe holding that USB, sliding it into her computer and seeing what I had seen. Maybe she would choose to walk, maybe she would choose to fight. Either way, she would be armed with the truth. And that gave me a flicker of strength. The arc of the story was clear. Downturn into betrayal at being excluded, upturn upward at the alliance Zoe might become, then downturn again into the gutting realization that my very identity had been a tool in my father's hands. The sin curve traced across my chest, heavy and jagged, but real. I closed the laptop with a decisive snap. The evidence was no longer just for me. It was for anyone my family tried to pull into their script. The truth wasn't a weapon, it was a key. The first letter arrived folded in a plain government envelope. I recognized the seal before I opened it, the kind of insignia that makes even seasoned accountants sweat. Inside was a notice. The family business had been flagged for review. Preliminary audit, the language said, polite and clinical, but the implications were heavy. The anonymous tip line had done its job. The ledgers I had digitized, the receipts I had archived, the inconsistencies I had preserved, all of it had moved into official channels. My fingerprints weren't on the submission, but my files had clearly set the machinery in motion. By the end of the week, my father was raging. He left a voicemail, his voice sharp with blame. "This is your doing. You've always been sloppy. You never understood the numbers." He called me a bookkeeper who couldn't balance a checkbook, twisting years of unpaid labour into a weapon. But the records spoke louder. My lawyer showed me the filings. Every form submitted under the family company carried his signature, not mine. The IRS didn't care about his accusations. They cared about signatures and receipts. And every trail led back to Gerald. For years, I had been invisible, the silent manager behind the curtain. Now, ironically, my invisibility was my protection. They couldn't pin their mess on me, no matter how loudly my father shouted. The news rippled through the family like shockwaves. Hannah's social media went quiet. My mother Ruth called me 3 times in one day, alternating between begging me to intervene and insisting that I had imagined my exclusion from the trust. I let the calls ring out. My role in their empire had ended, but not everyone stayed behind the phone. It was late afternoon when I stepped out of the hospital parking garage, the air thick with exhaust and the hum of traffic. Tyler was leaning against my car, arms crossed, jaw tight. He straightened when he saw me, the cocky grin of my childhood replaced with something sharper. "You think you're clever," he said. I didn't answer. I unlocked my car, but he stepped forward, blocking the door. "Dad's right," he continued. "You're destroying the family over nothing, over some paperwork. Do you even realize what you've started?" The anger in his voice was familiar, but the desperation was new. His life, his pending marriage, his inheritance, all of it balanced on a house of cards that was finally being shuffled. I lifted my phone, tapped record, and held it openly at my side. "Step away from my car, Tyler." His eyes flicked to the screen, and for a second he faltered. He knew better than to lay hands on me while the camera was rolling. Instead, he spat on the ground, muttered something under his breath, and stalked off toward the far end of the lot. When he was gone, I uploaded the clip to my cloud folder, labeling it Tyler_threat1.mp4. Then I slid into the driver's seat, heart hammering but steady. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't retaliated, I had simply documented. It was becoming my survival strategy, receipts instead of rage. That evening, another message arrived, this one from Zoe. It was short, almost clipped, but the weight of it landed like a stone. "I won't sign anything until they're transparent. The wedding is on hold." I read it 3 times. Zoe had chosen her own line in the sand, not because I asked her to, but because the truth was undeniable. She wasn't just protecting herself, she was validating what I had felt all along. That secrecy was their weapon, and light was the only counter. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because my family was unraveling, but because someone else had decided not to play their game. It meant I wasn't entirely alone in this. The audit was opening, stretching its fingers into corners they had long kept dark. My father could call me incompetent, Tyler could corner me in parking lots, Ruth could beg and deny. None of it mattered. The system cared about evidence, and I had it. I closed my laptop that night with a quiet sense of resolve. For years, they had treated me as if I were disposable. Now, I was the one thing they couldn't erase. The first wave of the audit brought paperwork, requests for receipts, invoices, tax returns spanning 2 decades. I thought it would take months before anything deeper surfaced. But then my lawyer forwarded me a discovery note from the investigators. It was a system log, dry and clinical. User login, Gerald Collins. Date, 48 hours after audit notice. Activity, adjustments made to historical entries, 2017-2021. The words sat like a stone in my stomach. My father hadn't frozen in fear when the letter arrived. He had gone straight into the accounting software and tried to rewrite history. Line items had been altered, balances shaved down, vendor names swapped for vague codes. It wasn't a clerical error, it was a cover-up. My lawyer underlined the implication in bold, intent to conceal. The sin curve spiked and dropped inside me. On one hand, I felt a grim satisfaction. The proof wasn't mine to fabricate. They had handed it over themselves. On the other, despair pressed down. My father had always taught us that mistakes could be explained away, but this wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate fraud, time-stamped and logged. I saved the system file into my evidence folder, naming it audit_log_gerald.mp4, even though it was only text. I wanted the reminder that it wasn't just numbers, it was a performance, a script, written in desperation. For hours I stared at the screen, watching the log lines blink like Morse code. He did this. He chose this. The arc of the story bent lower than before. My father would rather risk prison than admit the truth. Then Zoe's email arrived. She had been poring over the prenup drafts again, no doubt combing every clause with the intensity of someone who no longer trusted a single word. This time, she attached a screenshot of a highlighted section. assets held for future grandchildren. Her note was brief. I think they meant this literally. The phrase seemed innocuous at first, the kind of boilerplate lawyers use when discussing long-term trusts, but Zoe explained in her message that it wasn't boilerplate at all. It was specific language, inserted at Gerald's insistence, carving out a portion of the trust to remain untouched until future grandchildren could be legally designated. I read the sentence again, bile rising in my throat. My parents had seen my IVF appointment on the shared calendar. They knew I had been planning, dreaming of a family. And now, here was the proof. They weren't just excluding me from the trust. They were trying to lock my potential children into a legal limbo, assets frozen until they could be vetted, as though lineage were a business plan. It wasn't about money, it was about control, the same theme repeating in sharper tones. They wanted to dictate not only inheritance but reproduction, binding even children who didn't exist yet to a system designed to erase me. The curve rose again, fierce this time. Zoe hadn't just spotted a technicality, she had exposed the heart of their cruelty. The prenup wasn't protection, it was a cage. I called my lawyer immediately, my voice trembling. She listened quietly, then said, "This isn't standard. If challenged, it would look coercive at best, discriminatory at worst, especially paired with the audit logs." Hearing her say it out loud steadied me. My family could laugh at dinners, forge my signature, scrub mud from wheelchair wheels, but they couldn't laugh their way out of federal logs and prenup clauses that reeked of eugenics. That night I laid out the timeline on paper, sketching the sin curve with actual pen strokes. Upturn, the audit opening. Downturn, my father rewriting numbers. Zoe's prenup exposing reproductive control. Upturn man, the realization that their own signatures and clauses had condemned them more loudly than I ever could. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was clutching scraps. I felt like I was holding the script, and their roles were collapsing under their own lines. The collapse came quietly at first, disguised as legal jargon and procedural notices. Then it thundered. My father accepted a plea deal. His once booming name shrunk to a line in a docket. Gerald Collins. Settlement agreement to avoid trial. The Collins Heritage Trust was frozen pending investigation. The family company, the same one that had been paraded at every holiday dinner as proof of our legacy, was suspended. Government seals appeared on the doors, papers taped to glass like tombstones. Assets, homes, vehicles, accounts were seized one by one, catalogued like specimens under a microscope. For decades, Gerald had spoken of our family name as if it were armour. Now, that name was the reason for confiscation slips and case numbers. Collins no longer carried weight, it carried warning. My mother Ruth buckled under the pressure. The woman who had once laughed into her napkin at my humiliation now refused to answer the phone. Within weeks she moved out of state to live with her sister, her voice shaking in the one voicemail she left me. "I can't take the whispers anymore." She wasn't apologizing, she was fleeing. Hannah tried to spin the story online. Her social media brimmed with posts about family persecution and overreach, her captions laced with hashtags demanding justice. But the comments turned sour. Old classmates chimed in, recalling favours unpaid, debts overlooked. Former employees dropped anecdotes about missing wages and under-the-table deals. What she thought was a platform became a trial, and the audience she curated turned against her. Meanwhile, Tyler's world cracked open. Zoe ended the engagement quietly. No dramatic posts, no farewell dinners. One day she was there, the next she had packed her things and left. A single text arrived from her. "Thank you for showing me the truth before I signed anything." I didn't reply. The news hit Tyler like a punch. His inheritance was gone, his marriage evaporated, and his place in the family's plan dissolved overnight. He tried calling me once, a missed call I didn't return. I imagined his anger, his confusion, but I no longer felt responsible for carrying it. Then came the email from my father, 3 words in the subject line, "You went too far." The body was short, written in the clipped sentences of a man used to issuing orders. "This family will never recover. You've destroyed everything. Congratulations." I stared at it for a long time, the cursor blinking at the end as if inviting me to reply. But what was there to say? That he had destroyed it himself with lies? That I had only catalogued what already existed? Silence felt sharper than any response. I archived the email without typing a word. Sitting in the motel that night, I should have felt triumphant. The empire that had dismissed me was in ruins. The people who laughed when I brought them help were scattered, diminished, exposed. Yet the victory felt hollow. There was no joy in watching my mother flee, my sister crumble under the weight of her own propaganda, my brother abandoned, my father reduced to a case file. It felt less like winning and more like lancing an infection. Necessary but ugly, painful, leaving scars instead of satisfaction. The truth was that their downfall hadn't healed me. It hadn't filled the hollow place carved out when I stood in that dining room with the wheelchair. The collapse had only confirmed what I had always known. I had never belonged. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, laptop closed, folders heavy with evidence, and let the bitterness wash over me. I had cut away the rot, but cutting doesn't restore what was lost. It only prevents the poison from spreading further. For years, I had hoped that being useful would make me loved, but usefulness is disposable. And when disposable things break, no one mourns them. Now I was free, but freedom tasted metallic, sharp, and lonely. The family name had collapsed, but so had the illusion that it had ever been mine. The sound of collapse wasn't thunderous, it was paper, the hiss of a shredder chewing through decades of invoices, the thump of a courthouse envelope landing on my lawyer's desk, the crinkle of government seals pressed against glass doors, stapled notices fluttering in the wind. The empire my father had sworn was unshakable fell apart with the rustle of documents, like an origami tower unravelling fold by fold. Even the trust itself was reduced to a file number, assets frozen with the stroke of a pen. Collins Heritage Trust, pending review. The words looked clinical, but to me they sounded like a death certificate. In my mind, the motif of paper never stopped. I saw receipts burning in barrels, Hannah trying to salvage scraps for her social feeds, Ruth clutching unopened letters as if ignoring them could erase their weight. And above all, I pictured my father's hands feeding page after page into a shredder, trying to erase the evidence even as the machine screamed with the futility of it, but paper cuts both ways. The same week the trust was frozen, I learned where Gerald had landed. The house was gone. The lake property was gone. He had moved into a 1-bedroom walk-up apartment on the edge of town. No elevator, just 3 flights of stairs. I couldn't help thinking of the wheelchair, how he had spat at it, refused it, mocked me for bringing it. Now the irony settled heavy. His new life required him to climb stairs on aching hips. The chair he rejected could have given him relief. Instead, he had chosen crawl over dignity, and life had delivered exactly that. I drove past the building once, late at night. The windows were dark, blinds drawn, no signs of the empire he once boasted about. I didn't stop. It wasn't gloating, it was observation. The chair in my mind rolled silently up those impossible stairs, a symbol of his pride dragging him down. Yet even as I collected evidence of his downfall, another choice loomed before me. My lawyer reminded me that I had grounds to file a criminal complaint for identity theft. The audio recording from my college years, the one where I admitted he had used my SSN to open a credit line, was more than enough to pursue charges. With the audit already expanding, layering fraud on top of fraud would crush him completely. I stared at the file, headphones on, listening to my younger self whispering about betrayal. The urge to press forward was sharp. But another voice rose in me, calmer. What would victory look like then? Would I become the executioner, not just the witness? After days of turning it over, I made my decision. Through my lawyer, I drafted a civil settlement offer. If Gerald reimbursed every cent connected to the unauthorized credit line, returned under my name but used for his business, I would forego pressing criminal charges on the identity theft. The reimbursement would go into an account in my name only, recorded and enforceable by court order. The letter was delivered in a sealed envelope, crisp and quiet like all the others that had dismantled his world. The paper trail had brought him down, and now paper would give him one final choice: restitution or ruin. Some might call it mercy. To me, it was a boundary. I wasn't forgiving him. I wasn't letting him escape accountability. I was drawing a line between destruction and dignity. He had crossed mine too many times, but I would not cross his in return. The sin curve shifted again, downturn, the family reduced to rubble, paper screams filling the silence. Upturn, my decision not to annihilate, but to preserve a fragment of principle. The arc was no longer about revenge, it was about control over myself. When the settlement was accepted weeks later, the check arrived not from Gerald directly, but from a trust account his lawyer managed. Cold, impersonal, signed with the flourish of someone who still wanted to appear in command. I deposited it without ceremony. For the first time in years, my identity was not just a tool for others. It was mine again, secured in numbers that could no longer be erased. The paper trail had begun as proof of their lies. Now it was also proof of my boundaries. The new apartment was small, plain, and quiet. The walls were freshly painted a neutral cream, the kind of colour meant to offend no one and inspire nothing. But to me, it felt like a blank canvas. After months of living in a motel, breathing recycled air, this space was possibility. I signed the lease in my own name. No co-signer, no family ties. Just Mara Collins, independent and unburdened. I built new routines quickly, not because I needed order, but because I wanted to remind myself that life could be shaped, not dictated. Each morning I laced up running shoes and jogged through the neighbourhood. The rhythm of my breath, the slap of shoes on pavement and the burn in my legs became a kind of cleansing. No one was timing me, no one was watching. The only finish line was the moment I decided to stop. After runs, I would call someone I hadn't spoken to in years, my Aunt May. She had been the quiet shadow in my childhood, the one who stood silently in the background during family arguments, never speaking against my parents but never joining them either. As a child, I had wondered why she stayed so quiet. As an adult, I understood. Silence was sometimes survival. Now, when she picked up the phone, her voice carried warmth my parents had never given me. We didn't talk about the trust or the audit or even my father. Instead, we talked about recipes, about her garden, about the neighbour's dog that kept digging under her fence. It wasn't dramatic, but it was steady. And in those conversations, I realised something. Family didn't have to mean blood. Family could mean the people who made space for you without demanding anything in return. Evenings were mine in a way they had never been before. I cooked simple dinners, pasta with garlic and olive oil, roasted vegetables, grilled salmon when I felt indulgent. I ate at a small wooden table by the window, one plate, one glass, one fork. There was no laughter from siblings, no booming voice of a father commanding attention, no barbed jokes sliding under the table like knives. Just me. And strangely, it didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. On weekends, I unpacked boxes slowly, each one a reminder of what I had chosen to bring forward. Books with bent spines, photographs from college, a blanket my grandmother had knitted before she passed. I placed them carefully, not to impress visitors, because there would be few, but to remind myself that some parts of the past were worth carrying. Others I had left behind deliberately. The wheelchair was the last object. For weeks it had sat in the corner of the motel, folded like an unanswered question. Now, standing in my new apartment, I knew it couldn't come with me. It wasn't mine to keep. It was a symbol of a wound that needed closure. One crisp morning, I loaded it into my car and drove to a rehabilitation centre 2 towns over. The building was modern, glass doors reflecting the rising sun. Inside, I wheeled the chair to the reception desk. The nurse behind the counter looked up, surprised. "It's brand new," I explained softly. "Paid in full. Here's the receipt." I slid the paper across the counter, then added a handwritten note I had folded in half. On it, I had written, "For someone who shouldn't have to beg to belong." The nurse read it, then nodded, her eyes softening. She didn't ask questions. She simply said, "Thank you." I turned to leave. As I approached the exit, the glass doors parted automatically with a smooth whisper. The air outside was cool, clean, alive. I paused on the threshold, struck by the contrast. The last door I had walked through at my parents' house had slammed shut in my face, heavy with finality. This one opened on its own. No resistance, no condition, just space to step forward. I walked through without looking back. The first letter arrived a month after I moved into my new apartment. Not from the government, not from lawyers, but from Hannah. The envelope was thick, hand-addressed, my sister's looping script instantly recognizable. I sat with it in my lap for a long time before opening it, half expecting it to reek of perfume and half expecting it to combust in my hands. Inside was a handwritten letter, several pages long. Hannah's words spilled across the paper, part apology, part justification, part desperate spin. She admitted she had been cruel at dinners, admitted she had mocked me on camera, admitted she had taken my silence as weakness. But then her tone shifted. "The world is painting us as villains, Mara. If you could just share your side, tell the story differently, maybe people wouldn't hate us so much." She wanted me to collaborate, to provide an alternate version of events, to set the record straight. She wrote that she knew I still had documents, evidence, proof of the truth. She didn't ask me to hide it. She asked me to frame it, tone down the accusations, emphasize misunderstandings, soften the narrative so the family name might crawl out of the rubble. For years I had begged my family to see me. Now Hannah was begging me to let the world see them differently. I folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't reply. Not every story needs a second version. Some stories simply stand as they are, unflattering, painful, unchangeable. My silence was not vindictive, it was clarity. To rewrite the past for her would be to erase myself all over again. I had learned that lesson at too high a cost to forget it now. That night, instead of drafting a reply, I opened a fresh notebook and wrote a letter of my own. Not to Hannah, not to my parents, but to the future. "To the child I hope might one day read this," I began. The words flowed slowly, but they came. I wrote about how family is supposed to be a place of shelter, but sometimes it is the storm itself. I wrote about the nights I spent building scaffolds for people who would never thank me, the dinners where silence weighed heavier than insults, the moment a chair meant for dignity became a weapon of humiliation. Then I wrote about the choice I made to step away, to choose truth over performance, dignity over belonging. "If you come into this world," I wrote, "I want you to know that your mother chose herself before she chose you." That might sound selfish, but it isn't. It is the only way I could ever be the kind of mother who deserves you. If you come, you will never have to beg for a place at the table. You will never wonder if love is conditional. You will know from the start that you belong. The act of writing softened something inside me. I didn't know if IVF would ever succeed, if there would ever be a small hand in mine or a child running across a living room that was truly ours. But writing the letter was a promise that I would never let history repeat itself, that my silence would never be used as a knife against someone I loved. When I finished, I folded the page neatly and slipped it into an envelope labelled Future. I placed it in the same drawer as Hannah's letter, but this time it wasn't buried under weight. It rested on top, deliberate, waiting. The curve of my emotions didn't spike that night. It didn't crash either. It levelled into something steadier, like the flat line after a storm when the sea finally rests. Not dramatic, not triumphant, but warm, enduring. As I turned out the light, the apartment hummed in its quiet way. No footsteps above, no slammed doors, no voices demanding explanations. Just peace. And for the first time, I realised that peace itself can be the loudest ending.